Imagine this scene. Emperor Caligula, the man who holds the fate of Rome in his hands, strides into the great hall with his new bride. But she isn't a princess nor a noblewoman wrapped in silks and gold. Standing beside him beneath the torchlight and before the horrified gaze of an empire is a horse. Draped in a purple cloak crowned with garlands, Incitatus, the animal once fed with gold and wine, now stands as the Empress of Rome. This story isn't just some bizarre anecdote. It's a chilling testament to how absolute power can twist reason into parody, turn ceremony into collective humiliation, and transform a glorious empire into the circus of a madman. Before we descend into these dark pages of history, where truth is far more terrifying than fiction, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden horrors of the past, hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, because it's incredible that these fragments of history are connecting us from all corners of the world in the same moment of curiosity and unease. What you're about to hear isn't just the tale of an emperor marrying a horse. It's a warning to humanity. When a society applauds, the absurd collapse is only a matter of time. And once you've listened, I promise the sound of hooves that night will echo in your memory forever. You are standing in the marble hall of a Roman palace, a place that once witnessed glorious triumphs and victory parades of legions that conquered the world. But tonight, there is no triumph, no marching army. Only the clopping of hooves on the stone floor echoes like the death knell of a dying empire. The torches blaze, the incense chokes the air, and at the center of the chamber there is no empress, no bride, but a horse. Draped in a purple cloak, a laurel wreath upon its head, its black eyes empty, as if it had no idea what it was about to become in this grotesque theater. You inhale, but what hits your nose is not just the pine resin from the torches, it is also the stench of hay and dung not yet cleaned up. The smell of a stable fused with the incense of imperial rites, and you know even the air is mocking Rome. On the throne appears Caligula, once hailed by the people as a young god, once welcomed as a breath of fresh air after the years of terror under Tiberius. But now before your eyes he is no longer a savior. He is a mad clown in an emperor's robe. Bloodshot eyes, lips curled into a smile sharp as a blade, and a laugh that breaks the air like shattering glass. You see the senators bow their heads, none daring to lift their gaze, for the emperor's eyes have become a death sentence. Everyone knows tonight this is no longer politics, no longer ceremony. This is a test, and one mistimed smile means death. Caligula raises his hand, signaling the musicians. The cithara begins to play not a triumphal march, but a distorted melody, like a funeral dirge for the very sanity of Rome. He descends, walking toward the horse. Incitatus. The creature he adored more than any god, raised in a private villa, fed from golden bowls, drank wine mixed with crushed pearls, guarded like a prince. And now it stands there like a bride-to-be. You can feel the air thickening, the revulsion pulsing in the veins of every witness, but all must hold their breath. You hear Caligula's voice, hoarse, trembling with delight. O Rome, today I marry the only loyal being left in this world. He places the wedding wreath upon the horse's head. The animal shudders, snorts perhaps in protest, or perhaps it is nature itself letting out a mocking laugh. In that moment, time feels like it fractures. Roman history, from Cincinnatus to Caesar, from Augustus to Tiberius, all of it melts into a sick ritual where a horse in purple becomes the symbol of ultimate power. You glance around. An old senator has collapsed to his knees, hands trembling. A noblewoman clutches her mouth, holding back sobs. And a young guard, sweating profusely, eyes wide and bloodshot, looks ready to scream, yet fear seals his lips. No one dares move. No one dares laugh. no one dares cry. This is a wedding no one blesses, but all are forced to applaud. You feel your skin grow sticky as if the shame of a nation is seeping into every pore. The chill from the marble floor creeps through your sandals, but the real cold comes from within the awareness that you are witnessing a civilization being turned into a farce. This is not a wedding. This is a sacrifice of reason, a sacrifice of honor, a sacrifice of Roman pride on the altar of an emperor's twisted pleasure. And when Caligula turns his gaze upon the crowd, his eyes slicing through like a razor, you suddenly realize this is not madness. This is pure power. For absolute power does not need to be rational. Absolute power can make a horse an empress and an empire a joke. In that moment, you understand. You are not merely living in the reign of Caligula. You are trapped inside a nightmare framed in marble and gold. A nightmare so vivid that even if you wake, you will never forget the stench of rotting straw mixed with incense on this night. They often say that when Caligula first ascended the throne, it was as if Rome itself could finally breathe again after the nightmare of Tiberius. Imagine yourself as a Roman citizen at that moment, sitting in the forum, face lifted beneath the blazing sun, as the crowd roared the name of the young emperor. He was the son of Germanicus, the most beloved general in Roman history, a symbol of victory and loyalty. Caligula carried the radiance of his father, and in those early days, the people believed he would lead the empire out of darkness and back into the glorious light of Augustus. You could feel the joy spreading like a plague, the crowd cheering as if a savior had come. But like all plagues, joy too has an incubation period. In the beginning, Caligula granted freedom to prisoners, opened the imperial treasury to distribute money to the people, awarded the army with generous bonuses, and held endless celebrations. They called him loved by all. But you know, love for someone who holds absolute power is always a whisper before the storm. The people loved him as they would love a newborn god. But just as they once adored Tiberius before turning on him, that love was a trap. And Caligula fell into it faster than anyone else in Roman history. Just a few months later, whispers began to circulate. The young emperor had once been bedridden, ravaged by illness, nearly dead. Some claimed that during his fever he met the gods, and when he returned, he was no longer a man. Imagine him sitting alone in a dark room, drenched in sweat, eyes rolled back, believing that Jupiter had whispered into his ear. From that moment on, Caligula no longer believed he was human. He believed he was a god. And when an emperor believes he is divine, you know exactly how far Rome will fall. He ordered massive statues of himself to be built, placed next to those of Jupiter in temples. He commanded that temples replace the god's images with his own, and forced people to kneel before him as they would before a deity. Picture yourself kneeling on cold stone, lips trembling as you recite prayers not to Jupiter the Almighty, but to a man of flesh and blood, gazing down at you with bloodshot eyes and a bloodthirsty grin. The madness was not just in belief. It bled into the games of power. Caligula held banquets that if you were lucky or unlucky enough to attend, you would never forget. Food overflowed, wine poured like rivers, but no one was allowed to leave without his command. He forced guests to drink until they vomited, laughing hysterically as aging senators collapsed on their knees in puddles of wine and bile. He turned feasts into arenas where humiliation was the main course. Once Caligula prepared a banquet for Neptune. He led the army to the sea, ordered them to strike the waves with swords and gather seashells as spoils of war. You could hear the waves crashing, the soldiers shouting into the void, while the emperor stood on the shore, clapping like an excited child. The empire that once conquered Carthage, that once crushed the Germanic tribes, now conquered the sea by collecting shells. And if you laughed, you would die. He enjoyed playing with life and death. He would command gladiators to halt mid-fight only to have them kill each other in a new style. He gave prisoners hope of mercy only to execute them at the last minute, just to hear their screams mingling with music. He did not want to simply rule, he wanted to be the audience to a blood-soaked play where humans were the puppets and he the sole director. But all of that was just the overture. What truly chills you is not the blood on the sand or the wine on the banquet table. It is the look in Caligula's eyes as he stroked the mane of his horse Incitatus, an emperor who believed himself a god, yet found his only true companion in an animal. He spoke to it as one would to a soulmate, gave it its own marble chamber, fed it grains mixed with gold, assigned it personal attendants. He believed the horse understood him, while every human was a traitor. You hear him whispering to it at night words no one else is allowed to hear. And in those whispers, the seed of that grotesque wedding was planted. Caligula began saying openly that Incitatus would become a consul, that it was more intelligent than any senator. People laughed in silence, laughed like men standing on a pyre, the flames already licking at their feet. No one dared oppose him, and no one dared believe it could be true. But you know, when absolute power is held by a man who believes he is a god, anything is possible. That night, when you hear the sound of hooves echoing through the palace, you understand that Rome no longer belongs to men. It belongs to the nightmare of a man once adored, once celebrated, who was devoured by that very love. Caligula was not born a monster. He was an angel whose wings were broken by love and power sent plummeting into the abyss. And you know the abyss is swallowing the entire empire. You hear the sound of hooves echoing through the stillness of the palace night. Not the rumble of a festive chariot, nor the march of a legion returning in victory. This is the sound of a single horse walking slowly, guarded like a god. They call him Incitatus. But in Rome, that name is no longer just the name of an animal. It is a mockery of the entire old republic, a gaping wound in the empire that once claimed to be the most civilized in the world. You can imagine it, Incitatus does not live in a stable. He lives in a marble villa. He has his own private garden guards, stationed day and night servants, taking turns offering grass as if presenting a royal feast. At each meal, the horse does not chew dry hay, but grain mixed with flakes of gold. He does not drink from the Tiber River, but from fine wine poured into silver bowls. You think you must be dreaming, but this is reality, and you are standing in Rome where the emperor has given his horse more than he ever gave his people. Caligula calls him a friend. He whispers to him words no one else is allowed to hear, sits for hours, stroking his mane, as if searching in those soulless black eyes for an understanding that humanity has refused to give him. And you know, this is not simply affection for a pet. This is a replacement. To Caligula, Incitatus is no longer a horse. He is the only loyal witness in a world the emperor believes is full of traitors. From those midnight whispers, the idea of turning Incitatus into a god begins to take shape. Caligula orders a jewel-encrusted stall built for him, lays silk carpets beneath his hooves, and in one grotesque comedy, he publicly declares that the horse shall become consul. You see the faces of the senators. They do not dare laugh, do not dare cry. All they can do is bow their heads as their hearts explode with shame. Because if a horse can become consul, what meaning is left in the offices of men? You can hear the murmurs behind you. Has the emperor truly gone mad, or is this some kind of test? But no one dares answer. Because in Caligula's court, silence is the final mask hiding your life. People nod, scribble notes, as if this were a legitimate decree, as if appointing a horse could one day be written into law. And that is the true horror, not the madness of one man, but the obedience of all the others. At a banquet one night, Caligula invites Incitatus to the table. He raises a toast, pouring wine into a golden bowl for the horse to drink. You see on his face there is no trace of a joke. He is solemn, as if seated beside a revered senator. He speaks to the animal amid the music, ignoring the hundreds of guests holding their breath in silence. Madness is no longer a punchline. It has become ritual. You feel the bitterness of history settle deep in your bones. Rome once prided itself on law, on eloquent debate in the Senate, on the triumphs that spread civilization across Europe. And now all of it is being turned into farce by a horse. Incitatus, with his blank, empty eyes, becomes a mirror reflecting the true face of the empire, grand on the outside, hollow within. There are nights when you hear the guards whisper. Caligula goes to Incitatus's chamber, lies beside him, talks to him like a lover. You do not know how much of it is true, but in a court where nothing is impossible, you no longer know how to tell truth from rumor. The only thing you know for certain is that the line between man and beast has been erased, and the one who erased it is your emperor. The most terrifying thing is not Incitatus. He is only a horse born to run, to breathe, to exist. The most terrifying thing is the people, the senators, the officials, the warriors, who once held swords to conquer the world, now nodding before an animal just to stay alive. You realize that Rome is not falling because of its enemies. It is falling because of those who kneel before this twisted joke. You see it clearly. Incitatus is not just a pet. He is a declaration, a symbol of absolute power, the kind of power that can turn nonsense into truth, a joke into law, and humiliation into ceremony. And in the hollow gaze of that horse, you see the reflection of your own face, a Roman citizen turned into a puppet in a blood-stained farce. Tonight, as the hooves of Incitatus echo through the palace halls, you know that the most horrifying part is not how far Caligula has descended into madness. It is that the entire empire is clapping along to the rhythm, accepting insanity as a new order. And you, with breath caught in your chest, are helping keep the show alive. You step into the grand hall of the Palatine Palace and immediately realize you are witnessing something that defies all logic. Torches burn crimson atop marble columns, their flickering light casting shadows across hundreds of pale faces. The scent of incense is thick, but it is overpowered by the stench of rotting straw and horse dung. No one dares to breathe too loudly. Everyone waits like birds hypnotized by a serpent. At the center of the hall, Incitatus is led in. There are no triumphant trumpets, no cheers from the crowd. Only the slow, hollow clop of hooves like hammers tapping a coffin lid. The horse is draped in a purple cloak, a wreath rests upon its head, a jeweled necklace around its neck. It chews lazily on a bundle of fresh grass, indifferent to the spectacle before it, while every human in the room trembles. In its eyes you see nothing but nature's own contempt for this absurd charade. Caligula enters. He wears the emperor's robe, his face aglow with the fever of power. He does not look at the people. He does not look at the senators. He looks only at Incitatus. His gaze burns with the intensity of a lover. And then, in the suffocating silence, he declares, "Tonight Rome shall witness a wedding, myself and the only God who remains loyal to me." His words are not swallowed in shock. They fall onto the marble floor and echo like a sentence passed upon the entire empire. Music begins to play. Not a triumphant march, but a distorted sound, strings trembling like choked sobs. Caligula approaches, the horse lifts the wedding wreath and places it on its head. His hand trembles as if he were touching a real bride. He whispers something into the animal's ear, and you see his lips quiver like a man uttering sacred wedding vows. The horse snorts, flicks its head, and the wreath shivers. The entire hall shudders as if those were the words of divine consent. You glance around. An old senator kneels, tears streaming down his face, though no one can tell whether they are tears of shame or fear. A young noblewoman stifles a sob, her hand clenching a handkerchief so tightly it draws blood. A Praetorian guard bites down so hard his gums bleed, but no one dares to speak. Because silence is survival. To laugh is to die. To cry is to die. And even as your heart threatens to burst, you must clap when Caligula raises his hand. The applause rings out uneven, awkward, like the sound of bones breaking. It echoes through the hall, mingling with the horse's whinny, forming a grotesque symphony. You see Caligula laughing, his laughter bouncing off the stone columns, shrill and piercing, like a blade scraping against metal. He raises a cup of wine, pours it into Incitatus's mouth. Red wine drips down the horse's muzzle, staining the silk carpet in blotches that resemble blood. You understand, this is no longer a case of individual madness. This is a test of loyalty, a ritual that turns the entire empire into a farce. Every round of applause is a chain binding people to irrationality. Every fake smile is a dagger stabbing at Roman honor. And you too are being forced to become an accomplice with nothing more than the movement of your hands. Caligula turns his eyes, sweeping across the crowd like blades. He is searching for the traitor in every lowered gaze. You feel your back soaked in sweat. If he sees hesitation in your eyes, you will be torn apart on the spot. And in that moment, you realize the horse, with its blank, indifferent stare, is the only truly safe being in the palace. It does not betray. It does not plot. It does not whisper in the dark. It just chews and breathes. And for that, it wears the crown. The wedding night ends not with a triumphant anthem, but with a silence so thick it feels alive. Caligula leads Incitatus out of the hall like a groom escorting his bride to the wedding chamber. The torches dim, the music stops, but in your mind, the sound of hooves keeps echoing, beating a funeral rhythm for the reason of Rome. You no longer know what is real and what is a dream. You only know that you have just witnessed the death of honor wrapped in the sacred cloak of ceremony. As you step out of the hall, the night wind is bitter cold, but the chill in your bones does not come from the air. It comes from the realization that the greatest empire in the world has officially become a farce. And you, along with millions of others, can do nothing but applaud. You wake up the morning after the wedding, but instead of feeling like the nightmare has ended, you realize it is still going. All across Rome, the news spreads the emperor has officially married his horse. No one dares to laugh aloud, but quiet chuckles creep through taverns, down alleyways, and across the markets. Yet with the laughter comes fear, because no one knows if an offhand joke today might become a death sentence tomorrow. In the Senate, the senators sit upright, their faces expressionless like wax masks. Everyone knows that what happened last night was not just personal madness. It was a political statement. Because when Caligula brought Incitatus into the heart of the ceremony, he was not merely flaunting power. He was declaring, "You are no better than my horse. In fact, you are worse because at least Incitatus has never betrayed me." You can imagine the humiliation gnawing at every senator-man who once gave stirring speeches beneath the arches of the Republic, now bowing to bless a beast. What is terrifying is that the farce succeeded. No one dared to oppose it. The silence of hundreds of powerful officials was the death knell for the soul of Rome. In Caligula's eyes, that was victory. He had turned absurdity into truth, disgrace into ritual, delusion into law. And you realize that absolute power does not need to be reasonable. It only needs applause. As you walk the streets, you see the newly erected statues, not just of Caligula crowned with laurel, but of him standing beside Incitatus, the two figures carved from marble placed in temples, as if equals to the gods. Passers-by react in different ways. Some spit secretly, others kneel reluctantly, but all must pretend to believe. Because pretending is the only way to survive. There is one thing you cannot forget. While the horse lives in a gold-plated villa, the common people of Rome starve in the streets. The grain thousands long for is sprinkled with gold to feed an animal. A child nothing but skin and bones peers through the gates. Dry eyes fixed on the moment a guard pours wine into a silver bowl for the horse to drink. And in that gaze you see the truth shatter the empire that once promised bread and circuses now offers only circuses, and the bread is reserved for Incitatus. You remember the look in Caligula's eyes during the wedding. He was not laughing like a madman. He was smiling like someone who knows he has won an invisible war, the war against the resistance in people's hearts. When an emperor can force an entire empire to applaud a marriage to a horse, he has broken their spirit. He has proven that nothing is impossible. And you shudder because within that distortion lies a terrifying truth. Power does not require logic. It only requires obedience. Those who survived Caligula's reign would later retell the story with irony, brushing it off as a bizarre anecdote in history. But you who stood in that wedding hall know the truth was far more horrifying. It was not a joke. It was a wound carved into the Roman soul, turning an entire people into the audience of a depraved performance. And you also know this tragedy was not Rome's alone. Any society, when power goes unchecked, can end in a wedding like this. A ritual where reason is sacrificed and everyone claps in silence. You remember the sound of hooves in the hall, the broken rhythm of applause, the laughter of Caligula. Those sounds never leave you. They echo in your mind like an endless funeral drum. Because you know that wedding night was not merely the madness of one emperor. It was a sentence passed on an entire civilization. A reminder that collapse does not begin with war. It begins with a reluctant smile, a silent nod, an acceptance of the absurd, as if it were normal. And you understand the tragedy of Caligula was not that he married a horse. The true tragedy is that everyone, yourself included, clapped. You know a reign has reached its lowest point when the palace guards begin whispering behind the emperor's back. The wedding night with Incitatus did not just leave Rome trembling with shame. It planted the seeds of a fierce backlash, one Caligula never saw coming. Because in the blank stares of the senators and the scattered applause of the guests, a small flame had begun to burn. Not a public rebellion, but a conspiracy. A whisper. A decision that even a god could be killed like any other man. Caligula suspected nothing. He believed he was immortal. He believed he was Jupiter in human form, that no sword could harm him. He wrapped himself in the illusion of invincibility, and within that illusion, he failed to see the growing hatred flickering in the shadows. Imagine yourself as one of the Praetorian guards, once sworn to protect the emperor with your life. But every night, you hear that piercing laugh echoing from his chambers. You hear the rumors that the horse is fed with gold while your family starves in the street. One day, loyalty becomes a blade. The plot took shape at the very heart of the guard itself. Cassius Chaerea, an officer Caligula had insulted time and again, became its leader. They say Caligula mocked him with crude jokes, forced him to use childish passwords while on duty, and called him names that humiliated him like a woman. A seasoned general turned into a laughingstock before his own soldiers that was a wound that would never heal, and Chaerea swore he would end the farce in blood. That day came sooner than anyone expected. January of the year 41. Caligula stepped into the palace theater preparing to attend a performance. There was no warning. He was still smiling, still mocking those around him, still believing the world was a stage and he its divine actor. But behind the curtain, the conspirators were ready, the dagger hidden beneath a cloak, eyes locking in silence, hearts pounding. You could feel the thick stillness before the storm, the kind of silence that even gods would fear. The moment came when Caligula walked into the hallway. Chaerea raised his hand not in salute, but in signal. Blades flashed under torchlight. The first strike was swift and deep, staggering Caligula. He opened his mouth not to command, but to scream like a wounded beast. But it was not a curse that came out. It was the cry of a man who believed he was a god. And in that instant, you saw immortality shatter like a mirror on the stone floor. The second stab, the third, then a dozen more. Blood splashed across the marble, soaking it in stains that could never be washed away. The ones who once bowed now surged forward, pouring out years of rage through cold steel. They say Caligula still struggled, eyes bulging, mouth shrieking, as if unable to accept the truth that even gods can be stabbed like any common mortal. But when the final blade pierced his heart, he was nothing more than a trembling corpse collapsing into a pool of blood. You stand there, the metallic stench flooding your lungs, and you realize Rome has just witnessed the opposite of a coronation, a ritual sacrifice of the emperor himself. No music, no incense, no ceremony. Only knives' blood and the gasping breaths of those who had just freed themselves. And you see now the wedding with the horse has been answered with a funeral without fanfare. A death raw, filthy, untouched by divinity. They found Caligula's body left like a dead animal in the corridor. No throne, no laurel crown, no statue. Just a torn, cooling body lying in its own blood. And with that death, the entire grotesque performance collapsed in an instant. Incitatus, the horse once cloaked in purple, was once again just a horse. No one knows what happened to him. Perhaps he starved in silence. Perhaps he was quietly killed to erase all traces of madness. Either way, he vanished from history like a ghost that haunts only memory. You understand that Caligula's death was not a triumph of reason. It was simply the moment when madness became unbearable. Rome had proven that even gods can be killed, but the price of learning that was thousands of lives thrown into the game of a delusional man. And you wonder, if not for Chaerea, if not for that January in 41, how long would the farce have gone on? How many more blood-drenched feasts? How many more monstrous wedding nights? How much more shame before Rome finally awakened? In the silence of the blood-stained hall, you know that history has just closed a curtain, but the wound it leaves behind will never heal. Because Caligula did not just die as a madman. He died as a mirror, a reflection that warns any civilization that gives absolute power to one man can end in blood disgrace and the whinny of a horse. You step out of the blood-stained hallway of the palace where Caligula fell like a butchered beast, and you think the story is over. But it is not, because the true wounds of history do not lie on the stone floor, nor in the blades, they lie in memory. And memory never dies. Rome can bury an emperor, tear down his statues, even kill the horse, but it cannot erase one truth they applauded. They knelt before a grotesque farce. They blessed a marriage between a man and a horse. And when you look into that memory, you see yourself. Because the true horror of Caligula is not his madness, it is the empire's complicit silence. You sit in a tavern listening to people retell the story as a joke. He fed his horse with gold. He made the Senate celebrate the wedding. People laugh a hoarse, bitter laugh as if trying to turn humiliation into comedy. But you know that within that laughter, the fear has never left. Like a scar, the skin may heal, but when touched, the pain still lingers. And Rome, with all its grandeur, will forever carry that scar. You look back at history and see the irony. Caligula died, but he left behind a legacy stranger than any victory. No one remembers the festivals he hosted, the wars he dreamed of, or the monuments he built. The only thing etched into human memory is the image of an emperor marrying a horse. A farce that became the definition of an entire reign. A moment of madness that eclipsed centuries of Roman power. And then you begin to see Caligula's shadow in other mirrors of history. Dictators who worship themselves as gods. Societies that applaud absurdity not because they believe, but because they fear. Crowds that stay silent as honor is slaughtered before their eyes. You realize Caligula never truly vanished. He just changed names, changed faces, appearing in every civilization where men allow absolute power to become theater. The real nightmare of this story is not Caligula whispering into Incitatus's ear. It is you, yes you, standing in the crowd, clapping along. Because the brutal truth is, this humans fear madness less than they fear exclusion. You would rather join the performance than die for rejecting it. You would rather laugh falsely than become the next victim. And that is the distorted mirror Caligula left behind. No regime survives because of one madman. It survives because of thousands, millions of silent accomplices. When you close your eyes, you still hear the hooves striking marble, the emperor's shrill laughter, the uneven clapping echoing through the hall. These sounds haunt your dreams, they do not let go. Because they are not the echoes of some distant age. They are the soundtrack of the present of any society that could become a new Rome if all it takes is silence. And when you open your eyes, you understand why the story of Caligula and Incitatus has never faded. Because it is not just a bizarre anecdote in a dusty book. It is a ritual, a reminder that absolute power will always test us with the most irrational of challenges. And the question posed to you, to me, to everyone alive is not, how mad was Caligula? It is, when someone else rises and turns madness into ritual, will you clap or will you stay silent? That is the true echo. Not the blood on the marble, not the horse in purple, not the blade in the corridor, but the silence in your heart, the silence that can kill an entire civilization.